In Mexico in 1971, no woman dared to leave her home. The reason was because a serial killer appeared who specialized in targeting women. He had a hobby of using rope to tie the victims' hands behind their backs. Then he stripped off their clothes, leaving only their underwear. Finally, he strangled them to death and submerged their bodies in water. This incident caused panic throughout the city. In that context, the Mexican president had to face intense public pressure. To reduce this pressure, the First Lady decided to establish the first female police team in history. Maria, a full-time housewife, became a member of the team. There was also Valentina, Maria's younger sister, the girl with glasses, Angeles, and the girl with curly hair, Gabina. The four of them were determined to solve the strip murder case. Gabina came from a family with a tradition of being a police officer. Her brother's name was Gerardo. He was the captain of the criminal police team. He quickly arrested a suspect and closed the case. However, after only a few days, a new victim appeared. With the help of the president's secretary, Gerardo held a press conference. He announced that there was more than one killer. Meanwhile, Maria and the girls in the team were following the clues to find the killer's hideout. Unfortunately, they only found a double. That unlucky person's name was Ander. He was killed. The real killer used Ander's identity to commit the crime. Valentina's ex-boyfriend was a reporter for the Mexican daily newspaper Today. Felix went to the newspaper and received an anonymous letter. The first sentence immediately made him tremble. The writer claimed to be the stripper killer, and he asked Felix to publish the letter's content on the front page. It was a statement to all women. He warned them not to go out, otherwise he would kill them. Felix hoped it was just a joke. However, through his connections in the police, the editor-in-chief learned that the threat was real. But Felix refused to publish the letter because he was afraid of causing panic in society. The murderers said in the letter that if they did not publish it, he would not let it go. He had killed many people. 4 years had passed, but the story was not over. On the other hand, dramatic stories would help the editorial office attract the attention of the audience. At this time, Maria was watching TV when a reporter interviewed a murderer named John. He had killed more than 10 people in a row. After being imprisoned, he wrote several autobiographies. He even attracted a group of fanatic fans. When the host asked John about the identity of the stripper, he began to analyze logically. He looked at some previous cases and he saw signs of ritualistic punishment at the crime scene. It was like a punishment aimed at a special group of people. This statement caught Maria's attention. Soon after, the Mexican daily newspaper also published the killer's letter on its front page. This news quickly attracted public attention. The killer declared that any woman who dared to go out would be killed by him. The presidential secretary immediately held a press conference to criticize the editorial office for disregarding all consequences to attract public attention. Therefore, unnecessary panic occurred among the public. Maria wanted to quickly resolve the case. However, she was hindered by a lawyer. It turned out that not long ago, Maria's husband had an affair, so she decided to kick her husband out of the house. Now her ex-husband has come to the lawyer to sue her. According to Article 169 of the Mexican Civil Code, the husband has the right to ask his wife to quit her job to stay home and take care of the children. In addition, the wife must also take on the responsibility of housework and taking care of her husband's parents. Maria just learned about this today. She was surprised that her country had such unreasonable laws. Gabina noticed Article 169 of the Civil Code. She remembered that the number 169 was the number that the killer left at all the crime scenes. Angeles thought that this was absolutely not coincidence, so the group decided to find Alejandro. They noticed that the victims in the recent cases all had jobs. Before they died, all the victims were wearing work uniforms. Then the killer took off their clothes. It was as if the killer was specifically targeting professional women. Angeles wanted to publicize this news to warn working women. However, the captain of the women's police force, Alejandro, immediately rejected this proposal. He said that some people had checked the car before. That's why the killer blew it up. That's why they missed the important clue to identify the killer. After Alejandro left, Angeles reminded everyone that they were wearing uniforms, so they were also the killer's target. That afternoon, Maria disguised herself as a reporter and sneaked into the prison alone to meet the killer John. Because John's analysis was very accurate before, Maria wanted to use this killer's mind to analyze another serial killer. Unfortunately, John refused to cooperate. He offered to make a deal with Maria. If she could get him a piano, he would help her find the killer. After Maria spoke to John for a few sentences, her identity was exposed, so she had to leave the prison. Meanwhile, Gerardo began his plan. After capturing the scapegoat, he ordered everyone who knew to keep quiet. That night, under his direction, the entire criminal police team cleaned up all the evidence. They arrested everyone involved in the case, including the 6th victim's boss and the 4th victim's superior. They were brutally beaten. They all had to swear not to say anything. This scene caught Gabina's eye. Felix now had new discoveries, so he called Valentina. During the day, he went to the place where Ander worked before his death. It was a mannequin factory. Ander's girlfriend also worked there. She mysteriously disappeared after Ander's death. Felix announced that he had new clues, but he couldn't explain clearly over the phone, so the two agreed to discuss it further at Valentina's private apartment in an hour. Meanwhile, Maria was lost in thought. She finally found some porters. She planned to send the piano from her house to the prison. Now she really needed the help of the murderer John. Every second of delay could mean another victim. An hour had passed when Valentina returned home and found the front door wide open, but she called Felix's name several times without receiving a response. As she entered the house, she felt a surge of anxiety. The scene was messy and chaotic. Felix was lying unconscious in a pool of blood. Valentina quickly called an ambulance. When the ambulance arrived, Felix was no longer breathing. Gerardo heard the news and rushed to Valentina's house. Gerardo saw the numbers 169 written in blood on the bedroom wall. Before following the developments of the case, let's review the character diagram. In the film, Maria used to be a full-time housewife. She and her ex-husband Goyo had a son and a daughter. However, Goyo later had an affair, and the two are currently in the process of divorce. Valentina is Maria's biological sister. Meanwhile, Felix is her ex-boyfriend. Felix is a famous reporter for a Mexican daily newspaper. He is investigating a strip murder case, and he was just attacked by a bad guy until he was unconscious. Gabina comes from a family with a tradition of being a police officer. Her father is currently the chief of the police station, while her eldest brother is the captain of the criminal police. He is in charge of the strip murder case. Gabina's other two brothers also work in the police department. Angeles has a super observation ability and memory, so she likes Gabina's third brother. Alejandro is the captain of the female police department, and he is also the president's secretary. He is on a mission to improve the image of the police department. The person whose identity was stolen, Ander, was stripped and killed by the murderer. John, the serial killer with super intelligence, is in prison. Now back to the story. As soon as it was morning, someone placed a letter on Maria's desk. This letter was sent by John. When Maria saw the letter, it was 8 a.m. In the letter, John said that the information published in the newspaper was very limited. After analyzing, he found that the 7 cases had 3 things in common. The victims were all women with stable jobs. Their bodies were thrown into the water. All died of suffocation. Based on his own experience, John speculated that the killer had killed more than 7 people. They could try searching the unsolved case files in the police station to find similar cases, because there might be new clues there. Then Maria and everyone sorted through the case files, but the number of old cases was too much. It took them 3 days to find 20 similar cases. Angeles quickly realized that more than half of these cases were investigated by a former police officer. With the help of Alejandro, Maria and Angeles found the retired police officer's home. However, the results disappointed them when they learned that the police officer had passed away several years ago. The wife said that before her husband died, he was still thinking about those cases. Maria asked about the earliest case. Fortunately, the wife still remembered those cases clearly. Maria continued to ask if the child welfare center was still operating. The wife said that the center had closed after Rosa died. She also mentioned a child named Vincent who was still living there. Her husband had helped Vincent. Vincent had visited him not long ago and brought his case notes. Maria asked the wife for the address of the center. Maria and Angeles then went to the center together. There, they happened to meet Vincent right in front of the gate. The two asked to see the deceased police officer's notes. Vincent told them to wait a moment. Then he turned and walked down to the basement. Maria felt a little worried because she thought they seemed to be too reckless in coming here, because there was also a possibility that Vincent was the culprit. Just then, Vincent came closer, holding a photo frame. Maria and Angeles were forced to sit down on the sofa. Vincent was cleaning the photo frame while talking about his adoptive mother. He said that Rosa was a very kind person. She was completely different from his real mother. His mother was like a madwoman. Vincent kept hitting him on the head. Maria and Angeles were scared, so they moved to the door, but Vincent stood up to stop them. Maria quickly picked up a stick to defend herself, but the man still approached. At the same time at the hospital, Valentina looked at Felix lying unconscious on the bed and remembered the happy times between the two. Outside the orphanage, Alejandro was standing looking in with a worried expression. He opened the door and slowly walked inside. The dog in the backyard was barking non-stop. The atmosphere became more tense than ever. Alejandro quietly walked inside with a gun in his hand. Then he used a crowbar to pry open the main door. At this time, Maria and Valentina were no longer there. Alejandro followed the hallway and continued moving. He called Maria's name as he walked. Suddenly a scream rang out from the the basement. In another development, Gabina met an acquaintance on the bus. The two had met at a bar. That day, she was sexually harassed. The guy knocked out the harasser with just one punch. After that, the two got to know each other. The guy introduced himself as Benny. He said he worked at the city museum. Gabina felt that this guy was quite likable, so she took the initiative to ask him out tonight. The town park was holding a fair. Benny happily agreed to participate. Meanwhile, inside the orphanage, it was abandoned. Alejandro held his gun tightly and walked into the basement. Fortunately, Maria and Valentina were safe. Vincent came out holding a dusty box. He took out a diary from inside and gave it to Maria. It was the only memento of his adoptive mother. Maria opened the diary and saw that the date was 1949. Rosa was talking to a nun when suddenly a terrible scream was heard outside. Rosa rushed out to check. There she saw the priest holding his face. Blood was dripping down his face. The priest was furiously cursing his attacker. Following the direction the priest pointed, Rosa turned and walked towards the warehouse. She gently pushed the door open, and light entered the darkness. A boy was sitting there, holding a knife in his hand, alert. But with patience, Rosa calmed the boy down. She wanted to adopt the child, but the nun did not agree. It turned out that the boy wet the bed every night. The priest just wanted to help the boy change his clothes, but the boy stabbed the priest and injured him. However, Rosa thought that the boy just lacked attention from his family. The next day, Rosa took the boy home. Vincent remembered the first time he met the boy. Benny gave Vincent a very strange feeling. Benny was silent like a mute. Every night, the boy woke up with nightmares. Then he found out that he had wet his bed. Rosa wrote in her diary that she needed to find out what Benny had been through. So she went to the police station to find an experienced police officer. She asked why they had put Benny in a convent. The old police officer said that the court had ordered it because the child was involved in a murder case. They could not reveal any information. Rosa said that she had adopted Benny. Now the boy had nightmares every night. She just wanted to help him overcome this pain. At this time, the old police officer agreed to tell everything that had happened. That night, he received a call from a colleague. At the sewage treatment plant in the suburbs, a woman's body had been found. Her hands were tied behind her back. She had drowned in a tank of sewage. This woman was Benny's mother. According to the sewage treatment plant employee, Benny's father had gone missing. He lived with his mother. He had no other relatives. So the old policeman decided to take him to the monastery in town. After Rosa heard the story, she still couldn't find any more clues, so she had to go through Benny's personal belongings. Although Rosa knew that it was an invasion of his privacy, she really wanted to help him get rid of his past trauma. Benny was very frightened when he found out. She took the initiative to apologize to him. She asked him if he wanted to forget that nightmare. He immediately nodded in agreement. Rosa also promised that she wouldn't go through his personal belongings again. The next day, she started giving him rope therapy. However, it didn't seem to be effective. Back in reality, Maria raised her head and asked Vincent about rope therapy. Vincent explained that it was a method of training the mind to calm the children. After the ropes were made, they could send them to the grocery store in exchange for some living expenses. Benny was very talented at making ropes. The knots he made were strong and durable. Rosa also noted that Vincent was jealous of this. At this point, Vincent argued that he was not jealous. He simply did not like Benny. The two often had conflicts. When Rosa asked why, Vincent explained that he had seen Benny secretly watching Rosa and her husband doing private things. Rosa was very upset about this. However, she did not know what to do with Benny. The boy could not speak. This meant he could not communicate. Rosa sat down on the bed, wanting to listen to Benny. She also swore before God that she would never tell anyone. It was then that Benny spoke for the first time and shared his experience. One night about a year ago, while the boy was sleeping, suddenly his mother screamed. He went to see and found his father abusing his mother. The next day, Benny was woken up by his mother. She was covered in blood. His father was lying in the living room. His head was bleeding profusely. Although Benny was very young at the time, that image was deeply imprinted in his mind. It turned out that the night before, his mother had been beaten so badly that she could not bear it. In self-defense, the wife accidentally killed her husband. She was afraid that she would be sentenced to prison and her son would become an orphan, so she decided to take Benny and run away to Mexico. There, the boy and his mother started a new life. Later, his mother got a job at a wastewater treatment plant. Every day, Benny took his mother to the bus station and picked her up after work. Although he was still very young at that time, he always thought that he had to protect his mother. Time passed by, until one day, he did not see his mother get off the bus. Benny thought that he had looked at the clock wrongly, so he kept waiting. He waited for the last bus, but it was already dark and his mother had not returned. The driver told Benny to get on the bus. The driver took Benny to find his mother without taking any money. When Benny arrived at the wastewater treatment plant, he avoided the security guard and sneaked into the the work area. The shocking thing was that he saw his father still alive and sitting there. Hearing this, Rosa's tears rolled down. If she had seen her father kill her mother with her own eyes, she would have been shocked and hurt as well. Back in reality, Maria read that Benny's father had been arrested within a month. In the end, the boy lost both his father and mother. Vincent still hated Benny. Alejandro also thought that because Benny grew up in a violent environment, he would definitely be psychologically affected. At this time, Angela's first objected to Alejandro because she had also witnessed her parents being killed, but she had never thought of harming anyone. Maria agreed with this point of view and advised people not to be prejudiced. They needed to look at those who had been hurt fairly. Alejandro then changed the subject. Now the question was whether Benny was a stripper killer. Angela's did not think so, but she thought that if Benny was really a killer, his target would definitely be men who were abusive to their families. Then they continued to look through the diary. Since Benny shared everything with Rosa, he began to change positively. He took the initiative to talk to people around him. He also took care of the plants in the yard carefully. But one day, something happened that no one could have expected. Vincent's dog suddenly goes crazy and bites Benny. In a panic, Benny killed the dog. Vincent was extremely angry, so the two boys argued. Finally, Vincent was heartbroken and buried the dog in the yard. Rosa came to advise Vincent to make peace with Benny because his dog had bitten someone first. Vincent immediately stood up to protest that his dog had never bit anyone. Vincent thought that because Benny was crazy and he often communicated with his perverted father through letters. That night, Rosa could not contain her curiosity, so she rummaged through Benny's personal belongings, but she could not find those letters. Suddenly, she remembered that Benny often sat in the garden all day, so she decided to go out to the garden to check. Sure enough, she found a box. She was worried that the children would be negatively affected. No one knew what kind of ideology Benny's father would instill in him. The content of the letter shocked Rosa. It turned out that Benny had revealed the address of his and his mother's new residence to his father, so the father was able to find them. He told his son that he hated his wife's way of life, a woman who refused to stay home to take care of the children and wanted to go out to work to earn money. He also thought that this kind of woman deserved to be punished. Then Benny himself witnessed his father undressing his mother and then throwing the disobedient woman into the water tank and drowning her on the spot. Hearing this, Rosa angrily slapped Benny. She was completely disappointed in him, but he still refused to realize his mistake. Rosa returned the mailbox to Benny and went into the house alone. She had raised him for 7 years. She taught him how to read and how to love others, and yet she had raised a madman. In the diary of that day, and that day was also the first time in her life, Rosa realized that she might face danger to her life. In the middle of the night, she was awakened by a loud thunderclap. She sat up anxiously and pushed open the children's bedroom door. When Rosa realized Vincent was not in bed, she immediately remembered that he and Benny had argued. Rosa was worried that Benny would take revenge on Vincent before leaving. Music was playing from the basement. She followed the figure and went down the stairs. She found a necklace. Vincent rushed into the police station in the pouring rain. He screamed that his murderous brother was gone. His foster mother was probably in danger. The police on duty drove to the welfare home, but when Vincent ran home, he only found his foster mother's body face down in a basin of water. Vincent cried out in pain, "Mommy." Back in reality, Maria asked if the police had taken action. Vincent said that of course they had. Moreover, they had acted very quickly, but they had not found Benny in the house, so they decided to blame Vincent. That way, they could speed up the investigation and avoid having their budget cut. They were afraid it would affect their year-end bonuses. Alejandro said that it was the kind of thing that policemen do. Vincent said that he was grateful that the old policeman stood up for him, otherwise he would have been shot. In another development, Gabina went on her first date late at night with a man. They got along well. Gabina suddenly stopped and said that she had always wanted to be a police officer. However, she had witnessed some things recently that made her want to quit her job. She understood that the nature of those police officers was not necessarily bad. Most of them were forced into that state by circumstances. She was worried that if she continued working, she would become that person too. Benny advised her not to confine her thoughts. If she had decided to quit, she should have a farewell ceremony. She could throw her uniform into the fire to say goodbye to the person she was. Those words touched Gabina's heart because since she was born, this was the first time someone supported her thoughts. She immediately stood on tiptoe and kissed him. Then the two of them agreed to meet at 3 p.m. the next day. After they said goodbye, Benny walked into an alley. Benny cleverly asked the driver if he could lend him his car for a bit. Before the driver could answer, Benny suddenly pulled out a knife and stabbed him 4 or 5 times in a row. The man immediately collapsed in a pool of blood. Benny had a new means of transportation. He got into the car and tied the necklace to the rearview mirror. murderer. When he got home, he started preparing the tools of the crime. It was the rope to tie up the victim. He was the perverted murderer who liked to strip. While the female police officers were investigating, Gerardo was also constantly looking for clues. He heard from a colleague of the victim that before the incident, there was a young man who often went to the nightclub to dance. It seemed that he and the victim had a romantic relationship. Gerardo asked the woman to describe the man's appearance. The next day, he brought the portrait of the suspect to his superiors. He expressed his desire to hold a press conference to release the suspect's image. However, his superiors thought this was too reckless, because if the person in the portrait was really the culprit, he would flee to another city. Gerardo said that at least he could avoid having more victims. Unexpectedly, his superiors said that new victims would be needed to have new evidence that would help them solve the case faster. He thought that they just needed to distribute the portrait to those responsible for the investigation. Gerardo reluctantly complied. Maria quickly received the portrait. Angeles asked Gabina and Valentina where they had gone. Maria replied that her sister was still upset about Felix's injury. Gabina seemed to have quit her job. As soon as the two left, Gabina also entered the basement. She came to ask for leave today. She didn't expect to see Benny's portrait. Gabina rushed into the office to tell her brother about this. She said that she had a date with the man in the painting. This statement surprised everyone. Maria was nervous and swallowed her saliva unconsciously. Gerardo rushed over and hugged her tightly and asked if she was hurt. Gabina still hadn't calmed down. She had an appointment to meet that guy this afternoon. Gerardo immediately made a plan to capture the killer. However, there was a problem. If the killer found out that Gabina wasn't there, he might realize that he was exposed and run away. Gabina volunteered to be the bait because she wanted to see that bastard caught with her own eyes. The whole police team immediately took action. Maria and Angeles went to Gerardo and offered to join the capture operation. Gerardo's attitude had softened a bit compared to before, but this time the target was a madman, so he thought that the men should still do this. He promised that they could attend the interrogation later. Maria called home and wanted to tell her sister to come to the police station to witness the murderer being arrested. However, Maria's father said that Valentina had just returned to the apartment to get a change of clothes. When Maria heard this, she was immediately very worried. It turned out that Gabina had just been evicted from her house, so she had rented an apartment with Valentina. This apartment was the place where Gabina had arranged to meet the murderer. Valentina had just arrived at the foot of the building. Before she could open the door, she met Benny. She remembered that day at the bar. It was Benny who had protected Gabina from the harasser. She began to be curious about their relationship. Benny said that he had a lunch date with Gabina. Valentina immediately understood everything. She was happy that Gabina had a new boyfriend. She asked Benny if she could borrow the restroom. He did not think much but immediately agreed. At the same time, Angeles kept calling Valentina's house. Maria and the police team sped straight to Valentina's house. Just as Valentina entered the door, the phone rang. She picked up the phone and Angeles on the other end of the line only said one sentence: "Run away quickly, because Benny is a perverted murderer." Valentina was so scared that she couldn't move. She calmly turned her head and glanced at Benny. 10 minutes later, Gerardo led his men to the apartment. He rushed forward and kicked open the door. Maria followed closely behind. However, they were one step too late. There was no one left in the house. Maria lost control of her emotions. Alejandro had to hold her against the wall. Gerardo walked over and affirmed that he would definitely find Valentina. More than an hour later, Gerardo went to see his superiors, and he again suggested holding a press conference. Now the identity of the murderer had been confirmed. Therefore, he wanted to mobilize the power of the masses to find the murderer and the kidnapped person as soon as possible. Unexpectedly, the superior only said 3 words and said no. The reason was because the university semester was about to start. The plan for the policewoman was proposed by the president's wife. If they announced the arrest of the policewoman now, the election rate would definitely drop drastically. He absolutely would not allow this to happen. Gerardo asked him whether human life was more important or the election, but he stubbornly said that this decision was for everyone. Gerardo returned to the police station. Gabina gave him Valentina's photo, but he shook his head and said that they were not allowed to release the policewoman's photo. Gabina thought that this was the only way to quickly find Valentina, but Gerardo replied that he could only follow orders. Whether or not to do it was not up to him to decide. Gabina heard these words and angrily asked her brother. Gerardo also angrily responded to her. At this time, Maria ran in and told them to prepare to go and capture the culprit. They quickly arrived at Benny's house. There is no one in the house, but they were completely unaware that Benny was just a few dozen meters away. It turned out that he had returned to the house to get the rope, but now he realized that he had been discovered. Meanwhile, Angeles had found a secret room. Inside the room were several human mannequins. mannequins. The mannequins were wearing the uniforms of the victims. They were arranged as if in some kind of ritual. Alejandro had found Benny's work permit. Gabina glanced at it and confirmed that the person in the photo was Benny. Maria took the work permit. She intended to take it to the TV station to give to Gerardo. The photo on this card was clearer than the others. At that time, Maria's ex-husband was arguing with his boss because a company partner had lost a project. The boss wanted Goyo to take the project back. In return, he would consider making Goyo a partner. However, Goyo immediately refused outright. He thought he was supposed to be a partner, but just because his wife was a policewoman, he wasn't recognized. The boss interrupted with a puzzled look. He didn't understand why Goyo mentioned a policewoman. Their conversation became more tense than ever. Maria rushed to the TV station and handed Benny's work permit to Gerardo. She asked if it was possible to broadcast her sister's kidnapping. Gerardo stood up and said that he couldn't do that. Maria quietly asked if Gabina would still answer the same way. Gerardo took a deep breath and gave Maria his seat. The live broadcast started. Immediately, Maria announced the kidnapping of her sister through the camera. The MC immediately said that the plan was proposed by the president's wife, but now this happened, so he wanted to ask Maria if she thought the plan put women in danger. However, Maria did not pay attention to the male MC's question. She turned to the camera and begged Benny to let Valentina go. She said that she understood what Benny had been through. She also understood that work really affected a woman's ability to take care of her children. She also knew that Benny's original intention was to scare women in the whole city so they wouldn't go to work. He just wanted to make sure that the children would be taken care of more. She could understand that because she was also the mother of 2 children. Suddenly, the director came in and said that a man who called himself a stripper had called. He wanted to talk to policewoman Maria. The male MC immediately asked the director to connect the call. Benny's voice was heard in the studio. He called to thank Maria because now the whole city thought he was a pervert, but only Maria understood his feelings. Just as Mario was about to speak, the call was cut off. Benny walked into a hardware store. He was there to buy rope. Benny had no idea that the store owner had watched Maria's live stream and recognized him. 15 minutes later, Gerardo received the news, so he rushed to the hardware store. The store owner pointed behind him and said that the suspect had just gone up to the 2nd floor. Gerardo had loaded his gun. He and his teammates quietly walked up the stairs, but in the end, they still let Benny escape. Time passed and the police still hadn't found the killer. Everyone was more worried than ever. Gabina believed that every time the killer committed a crime, he tied up the victim and dunked him in water. He even prepared a uniform for the mannequin. He had even dared to buy rope, even though he could have been caught. This showed that he took the ritual seriously when committing the crime. Now everything was ready. He was only missing one mannequin. Gerardo immediately understood, so he ordered his subordinates to surround the only mannequin factory in the city. This factory is so big, it is 4 stories high. Gerardo had previously dispatched all the staff to other tasks, so it was difficult to gather forces immediately. So Maria and the others had the opportunity to participate in this operation. This time, even the police chief personally went to arrest the criminals. Inside the dark factory, due to lack of manpower, they were forced to split into groups of 2. Gerardo led the way to the 3rd floor. Suddenly, a dark shadow flashed by. Benny appeared from the darkness, holding a steel bar in his hand. When he was about to attack Gerardo, Gabina suddenly knocked him down. Then they tied Benny up and called everyone over. The police chief asked Benny if the hostage was still alive. Benny replied that the hostage was alive, but only temporarily. After saying that, he laughed happily. Gerardo immediately pinched Benny's nose and pointed a gun at him. Gerardo told Benny to reveal Valentina's whereabouts. In return, Gerardo promised to arrange for him to be placed in the most comfortable prison. If he didn't tell, Gerardo would shoot him and no one would know. Benny, however, remained silent. Maria quietly begged him to tell her where her sister was. Gabina asked her father to let her try to convince Benny. He sighed and agreed to her request. Gabina knelt down and said that Valentina was her best friend. Since they had known each other and had feelings for each other, she hoped he would tell her whereabouts. Benny's tones softened at this point. He insisted that he wasn't a bad person, but everyone around him thought he was crazy. Gabina immediately interrupted and said that she understood that Benny didn't mean any harm. He just used the wrong way to express his good intentions. Benny hesitated for a moment and then announced that Valentina was in the town park. Gerardo and the others immediately set off to save Valentina, with Maria and Angela's following closely behind. Meanwhile, Gabina wonders why Benny killed so many people. Benny replies that all women who go out to work are guilty. He was just punishing them for God. At this time, Maria and everyone quickly went to the location that Benny pointed out. However, Valentina was not there at all. Only then did they realize that they had been tricked. The captain was the one who reacted the fastest in this situation. He immediately drove back to the mannequin factory. Meanwhile, at the factory, Gabina shot Benny dead. Because the death penalty in Mexico has almost no chance of being carried out, Gabina understood that if she did not act, this madman who had killed more than a dozen people could only receive a life sentence. The next day, the police chief attended a media interview. He took responsibility for shooting Benny dead. The reason he gave was that he had performed his duty as a police officer while pursuing the suspect. The reporters kept asking questions about the whereabouts of the arrested policewoman. The police chief began to feel uncomfortable, so he decided to let the president's secretary answer the former media instead. At the police station, Gerardo admitted for the first time that Valentina was his colleague. Now they had only one clue left. They needed to search all the places related to water, including lakes, streams, sewers, and even the hair salon. The first victim had died in a sink. No one was allowed to sleep until they found Valentina. As soon as the order was given, Maria and the others interrupted. They thought that such a search would never yield results. Then 3 women carried the clue board from the basement to the lobby. Gerardo looked at them with wide eyes, amazed. He had been a police officer for more than 20 years, but he had never seen such a clear clue board. Gerardo eliminated all the distractions on the clue board to determine the locations where Benny had left his victims. Then they discovered that the killer seemed to like to leave his victims near his workplace. Gerardo immediately ordered his subordinates to conduct a search of all water areas within a 3-kilometer radius of the police station. But unfortunately, they did not find any clues. Maria felt extremely worried. Gabina had a new idea. She thought that Benny had acted very hastily this time because the rope was bought in a hurry. The location where the victim was left could also be a temporary decision. However, Angeles did not think so. She thought that they had found Benny at the mannequin factory because he had completed all the previous steps. There was a naked mannequin in the basement. That meant Valentina was the last victim. If the killer wanted to close the loop, the most likely place was the starting point of the case. Maria immediately reacted after hearing this. She thought of the wastewater treatment plant where Benny's mother worked. In fact, Angeles' opinion was completely correct. It was just that they realized it a little late. The captain had led everyone to the wastewater treatment plant. As soon as they entered the door, they found that the guard had been killed. The captain was sure that Valentina was there. However, when they entered, they realized that there were hundreds of sewage treatment tanks in this place. Angeles stopped and tried to remember the photos she had seen. Last time, she asked Vincent to bring the file of the deceased police officer. She remembered that Benny's mother drowned in tank number 37. The captain immediately took action and quickly found tank number 37. He immediately took a stick and smashed the drain. Gabina gave Valentina artificial respiration. Fortunately, she regained consciousness. When Valentina regained consciousness, she was still in shock. She did not expect that she had almost lost her life. Half a month later, the presidential election had ended. The current president continued to hold his position. 4 female police officers were summoned to the police station. What was outrageous was that they did not receive any praise. On the contrary, they were prosecuted for more than a dozen crimes, including illegal possession of guns, disobeying orders, breaking into a house, and many others. The presidential secretary announced that he had discussed with the district prosecutor. Because of the police chief, he would reduce their sentences. Specifically, the 4 of them would be given 4 years of probation. This statement surprised Maria. They had clearly solved the case and made achievements, but in the end, they still had to receive prison sentences. Suddenly, the presidential secretary changed his tone. He said that he had discussed with the police. If they did not want to go to jail, they would need to sign a document admitting that they did not participate in the investigation. In this way, the related violations would no longer exist. In the end, Captain Alejandro was very angry with this result. Many people were also dissatisfied. In particular, this inspector wanted to bring Angeles into his team. He believed that as long as she was in the team, their crime-solving efficiency would definitely increase. However, as soon as the heavy snowfall ended, the president decided to disband the female police force. A week passed quickly. The presidential secretary announced at a press conference that the president had decided to give special treatment to the murderer John. The reason was because he had greatly helped solve the strip murder case. 30 years ago, he was imprisoned for murder. Today, he walked out of prison as a hero. After that, the lives of the 4 women returned to normal. Maria had more time to spend with her children, and she also refused her ex-husband's offer to get back together. Gabina was still the same as before. Every day, she went to the police station to bring food to her brother and father. Angeles and Gabina's 3rd brother became a couple. At the same time, he also resigned from the police to pursue his dream of becoming a chef. Valentina focused on taking care of Felix, who was still bedridden. Sometimes Valentina helped Maria look after after her children. On the day the First Lady announced the disbandment of the female police force, Captain Alejandro led the female police officers straight onto the stage. Valentina gave a speech on behalf of everyone. She said that they had sacrificed a lot of time with their families, but society did not recognize their efforts. However, all those sacrifices were worth it because they had protected the people they loved. She then turned to question the First Lady. She recalled that when they graduated, the First Lady had said they were the best police officers in Mexico, but now she wanted to fire them. So Valentina believed that history would not forget how the First Lady fought for them today. As soon as this sentence was uttered, the First Lady immediately fell into a difficult position in front of the public. She faced a series of questions from the press. The First Lady was forced to give in and promised to keep their positions. From here, the female police team continues to face new cases. The movie ends here. Thank you for your attention and watching. Goodbye, and see you again.